this episode, I'll be speaking to my co-founder, Des Daly, about his experiences in the financial and property worlds and how he's continuing a second generational business of helping doctors and dentists increase their wealth. So I'm here with Des Daly, and he has an incredible amount of experience and knowledge across many different industries, from finance to property development to film production. And he's an expert in debt and equity, and he's worked on multi-million pound projects across the UK for ultra-high net worth individuals and various property developers. Now he regularly is invited to speak at property and business events, as well as running his own, and some have even coined him the master networker. So I'm also delighted to present him as my business partner, the co-founder and the business development director of the Doctors and Dentists Wealth Alliance. So welcome, Des. It's fantastic to be speaking with you today.
Thank you, Yelena, and thank you for that very kind introduction.
It all has to be said. So you've led a really exciting and colourful life, having worked across so many different industries. And what I'm really fascinated by is the journey that people take to get to where they are today. So I know that right now you live in Kingston with your beautiful wife and your two adorable dogs. But let's take it right back to the beginning. Where did it all start for you? Did you come from a family of entrepreneurs?
Well, actually, yes, I did. I was fortunate enough to be mentored by an extremely entrepreneurial father. In fact, my father was one of the first mortgage brokers. He worked for Legal & General, like I did, for 17 years. But he was one of the first entrepreneurs to actually work in an estate agency business. But before he did that, he actually had an office in South Kensington, and he was advising professional dentists that came over from Australia and India to set up practice. So he was helping them 50 years ago. So I'm really excited to business. But I used to see my father when I was 11 years old. I used to see him go out of the house every day with his golf clubs. And I used to think, wow, that's an interesting job. I used to say to my mum, what does he do? She said, he's going to work. And I said to my mum, well, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And I did. I followed in his footsteps. At the age of 19, I left further education and then went to work for an insurance company, and then ended up working in Legal & General. He was working in Legal & General as well. So I actually followed in his footsteps and actually looked after a lot of his clients when he eventually retired. But that was quite a few years after that.
So really,
that's how I started in Legal & General at the age of just 20.
So really, you were following in his footsteps in a lot of what you've been doing.
Absolutely, yes. I actually wanted to also work for a big insurance company. He taught me how to network. He taught me how to connect with people, and I actually ended up working with him for actually 9 years at Legal & General before he retired, and then he passed some of his clients to me. But I actually worked in Legal & General for 17 years, and that was in the Croydon area then. Completely different town back then.
And were you doing other things outside of work, or were you just focused on, being so career driven that you had to sort of succeed in what you were doing at the time?
When I was young, I just wanted to work in financial services. I had other interests. I actually was involved in organising events. At that time, they were just hobbies. They were just nightclub events, but it was just a weekend sort of thing. I was very sporty. I used to play golf. Our house luckily backed onto a golf club. So at the age of 11, I got my first hole-in-one playing golf. But I used to play a lot of sport. I played rugby, I played lacrosse, and golf. And I actually found that playing all those sports, I would meet some very interesting people later on in my life. But my passion was helping people. I sort of developed that passion learning about networking, actually. And then I got into, in the later part of my career with Legal & General, into personal development. I actually went on a Dale Carnegie course when I was about 27, and I read a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that book really changed my life. So personal development has been something I've been passionate about, and I've also always taught other people to. You can always learn every single day. Even today, I was on a webinar learning different business strategies.
Yeah, it's important to stay humble and keep learning. And for anyone that's not read that book, that is a go-to book for, I suppose, personal development and just really understanding the business and human psychology and how that all interacts. And really, it's such a vital book to read if you want to succeed, isn't it? So, in terms
absolutely. I mean, to be honest, back then I was quite shy, and it taught me a lot how to connect with people. I was always going to networking events, but I was the shy person in the corner. But after reading that book, I then learned an awful lot. And it helped me on my journey with my career.
Yeah, it's so easy to stand in the corner and not say anything and hope that people come to you, but really you need to, and I think you're a great example of this. You just can connect with absolutely anyone in the room, which is really fantastic to see. And
well, I think I was lucky. I think I developed that skill from my father. My mum has been quite shy, but she's been very, very good and always wanted to help people. So I've learned that skill from my mum. Even now, she still wants to help people. But my father was one of those people that he was pretty much the life and soul of the party. And I actually took my dress sense from him as well. He always used to like wearing very bright clothes. Probably he thought he was on the golf course all the time, really.
So how was your sort of transition? I think it sounds like it must have been quite easy to transition from the work that you were doing, being employed for Legal & General, into everything else that you do. I mean, how did that journey look like? Was it
okay? So I worked for Legal & General for 17 years, and my clients were growing. My clients' wealth was growing. So in 1994, I decided I had to become what's called an independent financial advisor, because when I was working for Legal & General, I was representing one company. So all my clients, and I had quite a lot of dentists and doctors that were my clients. One dentist and one doctor I dealt with for over 25 years. But as my clients were becoming more wealthy, I had to offer them more than one company's products. So an independent financial advisor meant I had the whole of market to be able to offer. So I actually met someone in my gym in 1994, and he said, look, there's a much bigger world out there. An independent financial advisor can offer a whole complete range of products from not just one company. So from 1994, for another 9 years, I worked as an independent financial advisor. And at that point, my clients had grown to a certain level where they were very, very wealthy clients. They were clients that were earning millions of pounds a year. So it was really good that I was an independent advisor. And at that point, I then suddenly had to structure what was called tax products. And in those days, we could shelter people's income. And that's what led me into becoming, eventually I became a film producer, because we structured film partnerships and people could invest in a movie and diversify their income into investing in a movie. And that was a legitimate scheme that the revenue wanted to encourage investment into a movie. So it meant that you could shelter your income and grow the British film industry. And the IFA firm I worked for, we ended up sponsoring the British Independent Film Awards. So again, all I was doing was connecting high net worths with money and structuring their affairs. I still was an independent financial advisor, but the company became pretty much experts in advising in that sector.
Mm. And I bet it's changed so much from when you were doing it at the time to now. I think with any industry, there's been so much change and so much regulation as well. Is it something
absolutely
that you're going back to? Or?
Well, absolutely. At the time, the regulation as an independent financial advisor, we had at one point, we had 19 advisors. I was one of the partners in the business, but my role was gravitating towards becoming business development because I was structuring partnerships with solicitors, accountants, and professional connections that would give us a lot of business. So I then decided in that firm not to be an advisor. I took a role as business development, and therefore my job was to really bring in professional connections. And we had probably about 9 secretaries that would deal with all the compliance and our own compliance officer. So we had a big firm that was based in Wimbledon, and we had an head office in Glasgow. And we were looking after a lot of health professionals at that time, looking after just not only their wealth, but also to make sure that they had health care, make sure they had all aspects like wills and life assurance, making sure everything was looked after in the business.
Yeah. And again, this is something that your father actually used to do as well, right?
That's absolutely right. So 50 years ago, my father set up a business in Kensington, and he was looking after dentists at that time. A lot of dentists were coming over from Australia. They wanted to work in London, but they didn't have a practice to buy. So he then became a specialist in arranging finance for the dentists. They find them even a practice to work from or a building. So he then partnered with an estate agency business, and they actually had an arm where they would find premises for doctors and dentists to work from. So yeah, I do feel this is a second generation business, and I feel as though someone's looking out for me up there, guiding me in the direction to sort of help a new generation of younger doctors and dentists now.
So you've had quite a broad range of experience in finance. How did you specifically get into more property? Because that's how we met.
Okay, so I left the IFA firm in 2008 after the little property crash we had. And then I decided to move into learning about becoming what was called a commercial mortgage broker. I had been a member of something called the Executive Association of Great Britain. In fact, I was a member for 20 years. It's actually the oldest networking lunch club in the UK. In fact, whenever I go to America, because I was on the board for 9 years, I actually can ring up any town and say I was on the board of the London Executive Association, and they would always invite me for breakfast. There is about 900 of these groups all over America, so it was a great way to meet high net worths. But when I was on that association, I met some very interesting people. In fact, a lot of my good clients now I met from that association over 20 years ago. I met a commercial mortgage broker there, and she said, look, with your contacts, I would love you to come and work on a business development role there, and you can learn about debt and equity. And that's what I did for about 18 months. And while I did that, I suddenly realized there was lots and lots of banks, new type of lending that would do debt. But there was always the problem. The developers always needed equity. So I then started approaching my high net worth clients that had invested previously in property and they'd got good returns. And I then started wanting to structure my own equity fund. So I left that person, and for about 18 months, I went out there connecting high net worths with developers and meeting good quality developers. I then was headhunted about 5 years ago by a very successful Mayfair developer, and they were dealing in something called permitted development, and they were looking for an older person, an experienced person, to head up their equity fund. So I worked there for about 2.5 years, and I helped that business grow from about 11 million GDV to about 400 million GDV. And I did that with a very, very clever, successful CFO, a chap called John Lamont, who's now come on board as our CFO. And between the two of us, we helped that Mayfair developer grow by introducing all of our connections, a top lawyer, a top accountant, a top solicitor. And we helped that business grow and really help them move to a really amazing level. So at that point, I then was speaking all over the country about how permitted development was taking off, really. This was about 5 years ago, when not everyone in the property world was familiar with permitted development. Back then, you could buy an office block and the value was a lower amount, even though you would definitely get the planning. Well, most of the time you'd get the planning if the 4 requirements were satisfied that were required with permitted development. But now the price is inflated if it's an office block. So that's really how I met so many people in the property world, because I was speaking around the country, opening the top events in Blackpool, Leicester, Nottingham, and also meeting all top property people, top property developers. So by doing that and raising equity for that firm, I probably raised about 3.5 to 4.5 million in about 18 months. And that was equity. And actually that was only 4 individuals. So they were quite high net worth individuals that wanted to take advantage of the permitted development boom that was hitting the London market. So that's how I ended up being involved in raising equity for developers. Then soon after that, I left that firm because I wasn't comfortable with the way that firm was going. I decided not to work with one developer. I preferred to set my own property event up. I then started helping people all over the country. I helped a friend of mine set up his own event in Plymouth. I helped that opportunity grow. I set up my own event in Kingston upon Thames. And then I met a lot of young property entrepreneurs that were looking to learn about how to find money, looking how to structure JV opportunities, and how to network. So I then fell into teaching young entrepreneurs in property how to network and how to find money. And that's how we met.
It is, yes. So I mean, we met at one of the top London property networking events, and I know we met a few times, and then eventually we sort of sat down and had a chat and saw how we could help each other. And really that's how this idea came about. It's something that I had been thinking about for a while. I noticed that so many of my friends and colleagues had so little time and so little knowledge as well, because they had so little time to invest into gaining the knowledge that's required, and yet they wanted something more, and they wanted something a lot bigger, and to really secure their wealth. And I knew that I needed to share with other people that there is another way. You don't just have to You don't just have to be working in your day job and what you're doing for patients. There are other things to secure your wealth, and that way you can focus on just treating patients and patient care when you're with them. So I remember I mentioned it to you when we met, that I wanted to put on a networking event.
That's right.
Just to let other healthcare professionals know that are in a similar position, that are going through similar problems that I was, and that so many people I knew were going through these problems, just to let people know that there is something else out there. And I suppose it just, after hearing about what your father did as well, it just seemed like the synergy was there. We have quite great, compatible
working relationship.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly it. And skills as well, and
that's right.
Knowledge in many different
I
things.
think both of our skill sets complement each other. Really, that's what it's all about. Collaboration is very important, but I think also, Yelena, it's very important that nowadays, there's not really a job for life, really. And you can work, like one of my clients who was a doctor, he worked in the NHS for 25 years, 30 years actually. But nowadays, young entrepreneurs, especially in the dentist world, they might want to do other things apart from just run a dentist practice. And actually, so many young professional dentists may have not just one practice, they might have 2 or 3 practices. So they're so busy running these practices, they do need the help to manage their wealth. And also, we can help them with that. So I think it's a perfect time. As we were going to be doing this at a top hospital, the British Dental Association, just off Harley Street.
Yes, yeah. So we're going to be putting the event on. We had everything ready. We had everything set. And of course.
But now we're going to do it in a safer way for people because of what's happened with the environment. It's now safer to do everything online. And probably it will give people the opportunity to learn while they are working at the moment, especially all the doctors at the moment. They're going to be very busy. So we can provide them with our knowledge and even our different ways they can be involved with us.
That's exactly it. I think it's the time right now where there is such a big effort that's coming from absolutely every industry. Everyone is trying to help, and I think actually more than ever, people are a lot busier as well in some respects. I mean, I certainly feel that for the healthcare profession anyway. And when a face-to-face networking event isn't necessarily it's not accessible right now, but even in times where it's not where it's not prohibited, it's still something that you go to, and yes, sure, you might make some connections and you might build up some relationships face to face, but how many times do you pick up someone's business card and then you just never speak to them again? Whereas I think now, if you have something that's online that is completely accessible 24 hours of the day, it's something that you can actually refer back to rather than trying to remember back to when you heard someone speak at an event. And I think that's really key right now, just providing people with the right knowledge and help and guidance and advice in terms of getting through it at the moment, what we can do to mitigate risks, how we can manage wealth at the moment, and really just planning long term for the future. And sure, we'll be doing events in the future, and I'm sure they'll be really fun, and I actually can't wait for that.
I'm sure we'll have some fun events, because also we can have some fun in this business as well. People love sporting activities, and I do think that's something we must have a bit of fun as well.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you there. So I think it's certainly my passion at the moment, just to show people that there is another way, as I'm sure it is yours. And with all the experience that you have, you're certainly in that position to be providing all of this knowledge that you have and making those right connections as well, because it's not going to be coming from us. And
absolutely, I think we're going to have a very, very professional team because, as you said, Yelena, quite rightly, things have changed. I'm not a regulated financial advisor anymore. We have got the top people in the industry to work with us. We've got top mortgage brokers, we've got top IFAs, and we have got top legal firms that will be working with us. So I think we're fortunate that the wealth of experience I have had over the years has been able me to bring some very trustworthy and proper professionals that I've known, a couple for 20 years, 30 years, 10 years, and I've worked with our CFO for over 5 years and known how he works. That's very important. So we're not a company of pulling people together, are just all starting in the industry. So everyone that we can provide information for, anyone who can ask us for information, we've got years and years of experience.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be very important for all of our healthcare professionals.
It really is, and I think it's the best way. In my opinion, I think it's the best way to go about it. I know there are plenty of other training companies and other companies that are offering advice on certain topics, whether that might be property. I'm sure you've all seen various property training gurus talking about how their experiences and what they think you should be doing. But I think
no money down.
Exactly. I think it really should be coming from the professionals that have been doing it for years, have got that credibility, have got the track record, and that can really speak from a realistic point of view. And really, you wouldn't go to a barber to get your teeth done. So it's, why would you go to someone that hasn't done it to gain their knowledge? So I think that's
absolutely
right. Really, it's just inviting the right people, the right experts in their industries, to give our audience that support and the guidance that they need.
Absolutely. I think the time is absolutely right. We're in the right place, the right time, and it's what healthcare professionals need.
I mean, from your personal experiences of working with clients in healthcare, what have been some of the difficulties and what have been some of the challenges that they faced that you think we need to address?
Well, right from the way back, that same situation that my father did for people that were just setting up their own businesses. They needed to make sure they had everything in the right place. So if you take a young dentist that may have just qualified, perhaps someone like yourself, they might want to buy their own property. Where do they go? Normally, they might just go to their bank, but their bank might just say, well, you need 20% deposit. They wouldn't have the experience to talk about something called Help to Buy. Help to Buy is a way where the government can give you some help. Therefore, you don't need quite such a large deposit. So certainly, that's one of the areas that every single person that I first started looking after, they always wanted to buy their first property. Now, I know that's a little bit different now. People tend to get married a bit later on in life and they tend to live together. Whereas when I was younger, they tended to sort of buy their first property when they're in their early 20s. And a single person might buy a property, another single person might buy a property. And then when they got married, they might both have their own property. Nowadays, that doesn't quite happen. So I think buying your first property is very important for a health professional. And then when they start accumulating wealth, they need to know what to do with it. So they need to have at least a review on their financial circumstances at least once a year. Now, these days, if a health professional is working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, which maybe they are at the moment, maybe they have to do that online. Well, our IFAs we work with, they can do everything online. They can send statements to our clients online. They can do reviews on a Zoom call, like we're doing a call now. So times have changed.
And I think even before that, even before they start to accumulate wealth, it's how do you start to accumulate wealth? Because wealth doesn't just come from your day job. It has to be strategic planning and making sure that you are saving tax where you can and making the right investments and actually making sure that you're saving money to be able to accumulate that wealth to then invest later on. And that's why I think we're bringing in so many different professionals that can specifically advise on whatever stage of the journey, let's say, that you might be on. So whether you are right at the beginning and you're employed at the moment, whether you might be working in hospital, or whether you're self-employed, it's completely different whether you're employed or self-employed, even to get a mortgage. It's completely different whether you already have a huge portfolio of properties or whether actually property is not for you and you want to maybe invest in stocks and shares. And I think this is almost a way of just really getting to know people, creating that community of everyone helping each other from their experiences in healthcare, because it's quite a unique place to be in. There are quite unique pressures that everyone faces. And
that's right. And actually, if we do have this community and we have like a chat situation where people can ask questions, I'm sure that will be very useful, because everyone's faced the same challenge at a different stage of their life. So whether it's buying their first property or a dentist setting up his own practice, so he might be, if he's got his own practice, he does NHS work, he gets a certain what's called superannuation type pension, government sponsored type pension. But then also if he sets up his private work, he can have what's called a personal pension. And that sort of different bits of advice is very important to make sure that you can use it, so you understand the two different types of pensions. So the IFA can explain that. So not just buying the first house, but even looking at pensions. And even a lot of people thought pensions were not a really good thing to have, and they went into buy-to-let properties. But a pension is a fantastic vehicle, but it just needs to be explained properly to the youngster, and that's important as well.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode of Getting to Know Us. Now, if you'd like to join us for part 2, we'll be speaking about exactly what's going on in the current markets and how we're going to help each and every single one of our members, so stay tuned. If you want to keep up to date with all our latest content, then make sure to subscribe, hit us with a like on Facebook and Instagram, and remember, stay healthy and wealthy.